All devices should be muted. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Clerk, are you aware of any apologies?
No.
Okay, and due to traffic this morning, I would say that we may have a few members will join us a little bit later. Attending via Zoom, I think we just have one of the witnesses is joining via Zoom, but none of the members. Okay, declarations of interest, members. I would remind you of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's business? No? Okay. Members, just before we start the oral evidence session, for the record, at last week's meeting we discussed new evidence that we have received regarding the SR 2026/1, the Shellfish Gathering Conservation Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026. Members, as you are aware, the purpose of this SR is to introduce a closed period each year to prohibit the taking of periwinkles from their intertidal area during the period of 1st of January to the 30th of April in any year. And to recap our scrutiny to date, on the 11th of December, the committee considered and agreed the SL1 following a briefing from officials. The Hansard of that briefing records that officials were questioned on any potential impact and the response given was that the ban on fishing for periwinkles for the number of months per year in the SR would have a limited impact on the industry. On the 15th of January, the committee agreed the SR subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, and that report is still outstanding. It's due this week. It will need to come, I suppose, if the legislation is to be made. However, last week we received correspondence and a series of subsequent emails from stakeholders which may provide evidence of impact, somewhat contrary to the responses given by the officials at the briefing on the 11th of December. We agreed that further scrutiny of the SR was necessary, and we agreed to hear evidence from the industry on the conservation aspect and from officials in response. Following the evidence session this morning, the committee will then agree the next steps and how we will proceed on the matter. Okay, members? So I'm going to refer you to the pack which starts at page 18 for the SL1 and the draft SR. Also going to refer you to correspondence from Seafresh Limited at page 5, correspondence from Hourglass Shellfish Supplies at page 7, series of emails from periwinkle fishers starting at page 9, and a copy of Hansard of the Department of Briefing on the 11th of December, and that starts at page 32. So now we're going to hear evidence, and this is on agenda item 3, members, which is for your papers. The first session is going to be an oral briefing from Seafresh NI Limited on the potential impact to local periwinkle fishers regarding changes to periwinkle fishing. So I'm now going to welcome Mr. Paul Lehman from Seafresh Limited to the meeting. And Paul, thank you for coming at short notice on a Monday morning, and the floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to your committee for giving us the opportunity to address you on this. The first we knew about this was when a video of this committee began circulating on social media on Sunday week past. When I watched the video, I was completely shocked, especially when I heard the answers to some of the questions. One question in particular was about the economic impact, and you were told words to the effect that it would have very little impact. You cannot close down an industry for a third of the year and not cause severe economic impact. Common sense dictates that, and yet that is exactly what is being proposed here. Furthermore, you cannot just give 12 days notice of any proposed closure. We have orders for the next 6 to 12 months in advance, and what are we to tell our customers? I did speak to one customer the other day, and I'll not repeat the answer that he gave me. So we're not the only ones. The other processors are in exactly the same position. What will happen here is that our customers will be forced to look elsewhere for the periwinkle, and we may never get them back. And if we do, it may be at a lesser price, giving us a further financial impact going forward. The other group of people economically impacted are the gatherers themselves. I have been inundated with phone calls since last Monday asking, did I know about this and was there anything that could be done? These are people who depend on this to subsidise their incomes, and again, they are given 12 days notice. I wonder would the architects of this legislation be happy to lose their salaries for the next 3 months with such inadequate notice? Many fishermen also use this fishery when they can't get to sea, so it is quite vital to them. And as I said in the email, you could split the year into 3 parts. The January to April is the time when what we call jumbo winkles come up the shore with the colder weather and the spring tides, and is fairly lucrative for gatherers. You have May to August, which is a different story. There's not as many winkles on the beaches because of a green weed that covers them, and a lot of pickers don't bother going. It might be slightly skewed there because in the summer months you have daylight and there's two tides, so people might be on the impression that there's more on the beach. There's more pickers on the beach. There's not. And then the final third of the year would be September to December, and obviously with the Christmas New Year period, that's when the peak in the prices come in. So also I'd mentioned the need for regulations, because we don't have this blanket need anywhere else in the UK or the Republic of Ireland. There are some small areas like marine conservation areas that do this. Lyme Regis and Dorset being one of them, but they again go for the May to September period. And I've spoken to processors in the Republic, and they say that there's no way that they would have regulations like this. It would totally decimate the industry, and that's what's going to happen here. The AFBI survey, this survey was carried out in Strangford Lough. I'm not disputing any of the findings of it, but it may not relate to the outer loch in any way, because that happens with other shellfish species, scallops being one. Scallops will spawn in the Irish Sea in the summer, whereas up on the north coast they'll spawn around March and September time. So the science is incomplete in that, and that's no criticism necessarily of that report. The length of notice, again, if I can go back to that one. After the video circulated on the Sunday evening, on the Monday afternoon, that was the first notice we got from the ministry to say that this closure was happening. Now, I can't think of any other case where something that's so long planned out would give people 12 days notice to say, right, that's it, stop, that's your income finished. And I think it's totally scandalous. I'm amazed that within law that you can even do that. But anyway, I would suggest that we could possibly defer this to put it into the fisheries management plan, which is to conclude at the end of next year, given time for sensible discussion, because there are other measures that are being proposed to do with this periwinkle fishery, and why they have just taken this one measure on its own baffles me, baffles everybody, to be honest. So I'd ask the committee maybe to consider deferring it. So, and just finally to say we have the support of the fish producers organisations, etc. So I think that's it.
Thank you so much for Paul. Just the committee don't have the power to defer it, but what the party do have, the committee do have the power to do, if they decide today, based on the evidence that's been submitted, is to issue a prayer of annulment which would bring a debate next week in the chamber on, and then it would go to a vote. But at this stage we haven't done that. So, and today's about evidence gathering, just to make an informed decision. A couple of points that I'll just pick out, if you don't mind. Just to bottom this out, and I'll probably ask the officials the same question. In terms of the survey that has led to this action, is it your understanding that that was solely based on Strangford Lough? And given that Strangford Lough is a site of immense internationally recognised conservation importance, it's not the same as any other waterway that we have on our coast?
Yeah.
That is your understanding?
100%, yeah.
Okay. You also said, and to be fair, I quite like this, because this committee absolutely is interested in conservation and the environment. You did say that you believe that there may be something that could be done if there was more consultation. Now, I think, to be fair to the department, this consultation happened in 2022, so it's not an absolute bolt from the blue either. But the communication of information certainly seems like a bolt from the blue 2 weeks ago, and the speed that this has mobilised at. In terms of mitigations or other angles that the department and the minister might be able to take, have you any thoughts on that? And I know you've pointed to Lyme Regis, for instance, which uses a different calendar opening. Is there anything that you want to put onto the record today in that regard? Again,
for the Lyme Regis bit, if there were to be, and I think I mentioned this in the email, if there were to be a ban, that would be the period of the year that we would most favour. But I think when you look at what Lyme Regis are saying, they're doing that for birds nesting on the beach, etc., that they feel that that's the best time of year not to disturb the birds, so it's not necessarily for the spawning. But the other important thing, and again, we're looking at a report that's done for Strangford Lough as opposed to the whole of Northern Ireland. They mentioned in that report, and I think you mentioned it, Chair, in the first committee, these are abundant. the periwinkles. It hasn't been regulated. And I mean, I know 70-year-olds whose grannies were prosecuted for gathering periwinkles. So that industry has been running for probably 100 years and is still thriving. So if we were to mitigate the loss, it would be to try to go to that period of the year, May to September, for a ban.
I'm just going to ask you one question, and it's in and around that abundance piece. So obviously the word abundant does appear in the evidence. Now obviously there's probably context to that, and I know the department are keen on this period because I think it's spawning season, and so there's other reasons around that. As someone in the industry that would be looking at this on a daily basis, do you agree with the assertion that there is an abundance of periwinkles, or do you see any deterioration in the quality, the numbers, or the size?
There's more processors now, so there's probably the same amount coming in being spread over other processors. But that's something that we're not necessarily happy with. That's competition. You know, we have to deal with that. So I think there's as many coming in as what there were.
400 tonnes was mentioned. Would you agree with that?
No, but I wouldn't disagree with it because I can neither prove or disprove it.
Have you an estimate yourself from a producer's perspective?
I would have thought somewhere around the 250 tonne, but it's a figure I'm sort of...
Yeah. And this goes back to the part that perhaps we do need some sort of regulation of, for a number of reasons, but the protection of the species and the role that they play, obviously, in the ecology. So you wouldn't be against regulation, some kind of regulation?
Quite open to talk about regulation. I mean, I did take part in that survey in was it 2022 we're talking about? Yep. And I spent a long time speaking to someone whose name eludes me now in the department. I must have been on the phone for 45, 50 minutes to him, giving him all the things. And from what I can see, I'd wasted my time because none of it came through here. And as I say, that stopped. And I heard nothing more in relation to any closures or anything. And why we're singling out a closure without the other measures doesn't make sense to me. But yes, I mean, we'd be happy to talk. The whole idea, I've been involved in the fishing industry for far too long, but I've been a representative for over 35 years. I chair the Scallop Association, I've chaired the NIFPO, and particularly in the Scallop Association, we've been at the forefront of conservation in the entire UK, and most places in the UK followed what we were doing. So I'm not against conservation. I'm all for it. We want to preserve an industry. We're the people that has invested in that industry. So
I'm going to bring in some other members, and just in case anybody thinks we're being rude today, it's a plenary day. So whilst we've got this session this morning, there'll be other demands on the members. So we want to try and keep this as punchy as possible, but as accurate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Just looking back at my note from the meeting and the Hansard as well, it said that there was 86% of people in support of the 2022 consultation. Were you public consultation? Did you participate in that public consultation?
we participated, but we'd been 14%. So
We opposed it. Yeah, and I suppose that again, I'm just looking back as well. The question I had asked at the time, you know, why is it that the time period that we have here, the ban in England is from the 15th of May till September. Why is it different? Why are those dates different in England than here, do you think?
Well, I think the scientific report from AFBI is saying that they spawn between January and April. But I'd emphasise again that was done in Strangford Lough. That doesn't necessarily say that it's the same around the whole coast of Northern Ireland. You know, a blanket ban doesn't make sense. But to give the example that I gave earlier about the scallops, they spawn in the Irish Sea in the summertime, whereas the north coast it's generally around March and September. There's two spawns up there, so it doesn't necessarily follow that report applies to the whole of Northern Ireland.
And also, I note that the French market is very big, and there's the industry here worth around 3 million. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's probably accurate enough, but that's based on the sell-on price into France. Yeah.
And would this ban place the industry here at a disadvantage to the south of Ireland and across the water?
A huge disadvantage, because obviously it's the sort of thing, you'll not go into a restaurant in France and not see periwinkles on a plate somewhere. You know, they come out in a seafood platter or whatever it is. It's a huge market there. And obviously the customer needs to get them, otherwise they lose their customers to the supermarkets, to the restaurant trade. So they will go to the Republic of Ireland, they'll go to Scotland, they'll go to England or Wales to get them. Then when we come out of the period of the ban, when we try to get the customer back, they're not necessarily going to leave their existing customers, because there is a fair bit of loyalty in customers when they buy this sort of thing. So they may just decide to stay, or we may have to try to lure them back at a lesser price, which means we can't pay the price then to the gatherers.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Declan. And Michelle?
Thank you. And colleagues have asked a number of questions that I was planning to ask, but thank you for your presentation this morning, Paul. Can you maybe talk me through the discussions that you've had with the department from the 2022 consultation to now?
Yeah, to my recollection of it, since 2022, as I said, I had a long conversation with a gentleman whose name eludes me, and gave him all the whole details of my perspective of the industry. And I think the next there was one fisheries management plan that Harry Wick and Adam Holland were on, and periwinkles were mentioned there, and they said that they weren't involved in them, obviously because it's a slightly different idea. The fish produce organisation deal with people with boats, and these are all gatherers. And I was on the Zoom and said, well, I have, because it's important to us. And then the next conversation that I can recollect would have been last Wednesday with Patrick, which started off as a fairly robust conversation, ended up quite amicable. Patrick always has that way of affecting people, but that was it. There was nothing in between. There was no sign of a closure coming, and certainly not with a 12-day notice.
We've talked about the difference between what you believe the amount of stock there is compared to what the department has detailed in when they spoke to committee. But whenever you're speaking to gatherers, or they're bringing stock to you, do you take any record as to where the stock has come from? Because I'm curious to know the percentage of stock that's maybe come from Strangford Lough, and maybe then from other areas, to get an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah, unfortunately not. We would know the area where it comes from, whether the outer Ards Peninsula, etc. Strangford Lough, we tend to get very little from Strangford Lough because they have a barnacle on them, and most of our customers don't want that particular product. So we don't deal a lot with anything from Strangford Lough, but it's mostly the outer Ards area.
So I suppose I'm sort of leading in the direction of, were there to be a potential restriction?
Yeah.
Would there be an impact if the restriction was just within Strangford Lough?
There would be an impact, but it would be a much lesser impact, obviously. And from our perspective, there may be other buyers that buy in Strangford, but that's. I couldn't argue against the science in Strangford Lough because it's there, but what I'm saying is, it doesn't necessarily relate to outside Strangford Lough. Yeah. So, but there would be an impact, but much lesser.
Okay. And I suppose I'm thinking that way just because of the fact that AFB did do that piece of work in 2022, and also because obviously on the mainland there's a small restriction in around that sort of Dorset area as well, which is obviously for particular sort of environmental reasons.
Yeah. Well, that is something that there may be more than Dorset actually that have those small areas, but nowhere has a blanket ban.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And John.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for the presentation and information today and that you've provided
previously. I have a few questions now. The differences between the proposals here and the outworkings that there have already been in GB, we can obviously discuss with departmental officials, and I can assure you we will. But if I could just clarify in my mind, trying to square the conservation with the industry sector, and I accept, I'll be upfront with you, there's conservation need here, or we wouldn't be in this position. So to try and clarify the differentiation between the areas and the stocks and all of that, can I ask you, would you accept that if the periwinkles in Strangford need to be protected, then the chances are that they would need to be protected and conserved elsewhere as well, to some degree?
No, not necessarily.
Why would that be?
Well, if we look at other species in Strangford, it's totally enclosed. It's a totally different ecosystem. I'm not saying that we wouldn't need to do something outside, but because Strangford doesn't necessarily mean that we have to.
Okay. The other, I think, quite obvious question is that, and I know you may not be responsible for any increase, I'm not suggesting that you are, but if there's been an increase in processors as you described, which in turn must also mean an increase, however substantial, in the numbers of gatherers in a non-regulated sector, surely that growth in itself is going to have a significant impact on stocks?
It doesn't impact the number of gatherers because there's more processors. What happens is the gatherers go to the other processors.
They're gathering more, perhaps, are they?
No, not necessarily. It's the same amount of pickers, but they're spreading it around.
Okay.
What I said earlier, we wouldn't necessarily be getting as much. There's more competition. So, you know, if we'd been buying X amount so many years ago, it doesn't mean we're buying that amount now, but there's still the same amount coming in.
Okay. And then on the economic aspect of this, and a number of pieces of correspondence we have mention supplementing an income rather than providing an income. Could you give us any indication of the degree of that supplementary income as a percentage of a person's earnings, and also how many full-time jobs are at stake here versus that supplementary income, or if we call it a part-time or subsidiary activity?
Yeah, I couldn't give you an indication of the percentage because that's down to each individual. I don't know their personal circumstances. I don't know what they're earning outside that. But there's probably around the Northern Ireland coast. There's probably around 80 to 100 pickers. Full time would be a very small figure because it's not a job you can guarantee. And as I said earlier on, fishermen, for example, use this quite often if they can't get out. And we've just had a period of bad easterly winds, and there's more coming tomorrow. And they would use that now to supplement their income, or lack of income.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you, John. Any other questions from any of the members? You're content? Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate your time. Could I just maybe clarify this one? It's on the back of John's, just for absolute clarity. If this was to come in the third of the year, in terms of the fiscal impact and the employment impact, what would that manifest? How would that manifest?
It's hard to totally define, Chair, because the big question is when we lose our customers because we can't supply them, do we get them back? So are we just talking about a third of the year's income being lost? And again, which third of the year is that? Because as I broke it down earlier, there's three parts. 2/3 of the year are very lucrative, and the middle part isn't.
Lose the most lucrative part is what you're saying too, isn't that right? With the jumbo.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the tides at the moment are just perfect, and there's easterly winds. So I would quite imagine everybody will be out this week trying. It's not an easy job to be honest. You know, I mean, you got to hand it to the pickers that actually do this.
I wouldn't like to be out doing it last week or the week before with the weather that we had.
But they will do, you see. Yeah. And I mean, when there's frost apparently brings the jumbos up the shore, and they're down there picking with their hands into the water, lifting this stuff. You know, it's a hardy It's a hardy business. So.
Thank you, Paul. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the...
I can stay in.
You can sit in the public
Okay.
gallery there, okay?
Much obliged. Thank you for your time.
Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, members. Agenda item 4 then is a briefing from the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force, and they're going to discuss the impact to the local marine environment from periwinkle fishing. Yep, short paper has just been, if you check your emails, guys, there's a paper from the Marine Task Force that I think we circulated about 15 minutes ago, if you want to pick that up. But they're going to come in now. Good morning.
Morning.
Are you on your own today, Robert?
Yes,
Usually you bring a team.
trusted to be solo today, which is good.
Very good. You've been promoted then.
Yeah.
And solo. Well, listen, welcome, Robert. Robert Walsh is from the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force. Thank you. And we have received the paper, but members maybe haven't had time. So you can refer to it, but members maybe need to just check through their emails to grab it, if that's okay. So the floor is yours, Robert.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, for the members who haven't had the chance to read through, I'll be going through the points anyway. I'll preface my briefing by saying, for those who are familiar with the Marine Task Force, we have a section in our Marine Vision which says sustainable fisheries, not eradicating fisheries. We're aware that many people hand gather periwinkles in Strangford, and there are other areas, such as Belfast Lough, where there is already prohibitions in place. Our concern with this not going ahead or being reduced to Strangford Lough is that it has the potential to push those gatherers further afield, which then creates pressure on those other areas. In those particular areas, we may not have the data that we would require to make as an informed decision. Therefore, there could be pressures already taking place that could be exacerbated further. But in Belfast Lough, the prohibitions fall under the Belfast Corporation Act from 1930, and that is specifically Section 42. If there are a large proportion or an increased proportion of hand gatherers, doing this across the year can quickly become unsustainable, potentially, for wild populations, as the industry is currently unregulated. And this guarantees that increased pressure on available food webs and food sources to intertidal species such as seabirds. Wild populations are drivers of food webs which support intertidal species such as waders and seabirds, which are currently facing declines. Currently, as within the JNCC seabird count, it highlights that nearly 60% of breeding seabird populations in the UK have faced declines, with declines such as 70% of Atlantic puffin, which I know maybe don't eat periwinkles, but 75% of those are also roseate terns. Strangford Lough in particular is a known breeding ground for terns. The closed season is based on the Irish Sea influencing reproductive seasons, and of course, as has been highlighted already, Strangford Lough is an enclosed system compared to other areas of the UK where the closed seasons which have been established are different. The reproductive spawning times are different. The closed season going ahead would support not only wild populations but also the sustainability of the industry moving forward, and supporting those food webs, which provides an ecosystem-based approach which is required under the Joint Fisheries Statement of 2022. Periwinkles are only part of the picture. It needs regulation in place for other species which are hand-gathered. If periwinkles are taken out of the system, this can then apply pressure to other species such as mussels, oysters, razor clams, cockles. And we highlighted this within the our consultation response to the amendments to Annex A of the Joint Fisheries Statement, which was in December of 2024, and also within the call for evidence on intertidal hand gathering in 2022. We know that these other species are looking to be addressed through work on the intertidal hand gathering of shellfish FMP, which is to be published in 2027, which we continue to be a stakeholder. A few other points to make is that within that 2022 response, we were in support of other recommendations, other proposals, but I think we can all agree that whether we were coming here today with one measure or six, there would still be a little bit of pushback. Climate change impacts to shellfish are viewed as cumulative, and therefore there already exists a risk to gatherers for the future based on the shell structure. And this closed season would be a key step in the right direction to ensure that marine environmental protection and the continuation of an ecosystem-based approach to a currently unregulated activity can continue moving forward and provide that sustainability. NIMTF would like to see this remaining NI-wide and receive pragmatic enforcement to ensure that it can be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks for coming at such short notice. First, I've got two questions for you. The first one is actually from your report. So, and you did point out, for instance, that oysters, blue mussels, cockles, and razor clams will be dealt with in the intertidal hand gathering of shellfish FMP, which is going to be published in 2027, which is next year. What's the rush on periwinkles if we're going to deal with all of the other shellfish in 2027? Because the paper from the department uses the word abundance, and some of the organisations will suggest that there is an abundance.
Yeah. So periwinkles, their common name is the common periwinkle, which was given to it because it was found kind of pretty much everywhere. The problem is with the levels of different pressure in terms of level of gathering, in terms of climate change, in terms of as a food source for wild populations of seabirds, there's a lot of need and a lot of usage of this resource, and it very, very quickly starts to lower the pot, as it were, without protecting that spawning season. There is a risk that eventually that pot will run dry and not be replenished.
Okay, and I don't want to be hard on you, but you used the word potentially, could, and maybe a couple of times, in saying that is there any evidence to suggest that that is the case for periwinkles at the moment, that the intensification of the gathering and picking is having a negative impact, and has there been a decline in periwinkle numbers to this point?
I'm not certain about whether or not there has been a decline in periwinkle numbers, but I do know that based on the shell structure of periwinkles, that with climate change moving forward, numbers will absolutely guarantee are guaranteed to decline if we cannot change what's currently taking place in terms of ocean acidification. Okay. So that will be an additional pressure to the gatherers. Okay,
and so would that not then similarly be true of oysters, blue mussels, cockles, and razor clams?
Yes.
So, I'll go back to the first question. Why do you think there is a need to treat them any different when all of the species are going to be impacted similarly due to climate change and the environmental factors? It does seem increasingly odd to me that the department want to push this one through.
Push this one through. Yeah. As I said, this is the starting step in terms of addressing wider ecosystem-based approaches for this FMP. If, say for example, periwinkles were to be wiped out, the next species would be blue mussels, oysters, razor clams, and cockles. If those measures are not in place for those species before, in a timely manner, we risk losing those species as well.
Is there like a pyramid, a hierarchical system of these? This is my last one, guys, so you can be ready in terms of those shellfish. So is there a hierarchical one? Does one hold the other up? Because I know I've been down with you on my birthday last year, just to be clear, and I didn't get out to look at the was it oysters or something that we were looking at that. We were supposed to be looking at it. So I have to get down again. So I understand the absolute need for that. I mean, there's an inarguable and a calculated deficiency there. But I've yet to be convinced that this is the same, because no one has convinced me that the abundance doesn't exist, or I'm not sure what the evidence is, and I'll maybe have to return to that. And we'll certainly will.
No, absolutely. And there is a thing where people can take a personal bag consumption, or they can take a bag limit. I can't remember the exact size of it or weight, but we have images that we have sent to the department which show that there is a bag that is far bigger than a personal bag consumption being taken place. There's also, in terms of wildlife disturbance, people going down and collecting these things in areas for seabirds where they are maybe overwintering and things like that. So whilst mussels and oysters form that kind of reef species, the combined with the periwinkles, those form the food sources for other wild populations which are attracted to those reef species. So I wouldn't say there's if you remove the mussels or the oysters and you take away those kind of reef bed habitats, there is a risk that you would also lose these other species.
Remember that piece from you were saying about the reef bed, and
it attracts the biodiversity and improves that. Yeah.
Okay, and my final one, I know I said, but this is my final one, and then Declan, I'll let you in. Could you calculate for me, I suppose, if I was minded, that I would rather see them picked up in the FMP for 2027?
Yeah.
What's the risk, in your estimation?
The risk of it not...
Wait until we get an agreed way forward for the FMP 2027 with the other shellfish.
I think because of originally when this was first put to consultation in 2024, it was just talking about periwinkles, which would be easy to just work on a single species because of the complexity of the food webs, having them aligned with each other moving forward. I think it would be harder to push something through if you were to suddenly come with a piece of legislation that talked about 4 different species all in one go, trying to push that forward. So perhaps bringing those individual measures through that align with one another to protect the food webs is perhaps the best way forward.
Thank you very much. John?
Robert, you have thanks for the information you've been able to give us here. You've explained this, but I want you to do it in, you know where I'm coming from, as clear a way as possible, so that we can have it absolutely clear in our minds, and that the record of the information given here will also be as clear as possible. Mm-hmm. So, is the scientific proof and information that differences in tidal movements and ecological conditions around the shores of these islands, plural, mean that there is, by the very nature of that, pardon the pun, going to be differences in any close season that would be implemented, related directly, I assume, to the life cycle of the periwinkle that we're talking about?
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit more information about that?
I don't have that information to hand. Okay. But I know it's different in terms of hydrology because of the Irish Sea. For Northern Ireland, you will see different breeding seasons compared to Lyme Regis, which is the kind of southern end of England. You won't see those kind of same time periods over here in Northern Ireland as you would in the rest of the UK, just because of the way that the Irish Sea brings in that kind of influx of hydrology, nutrients, upwelling, temperature, which then has an influence as it comes through into Strangford. So it is possible that there will need to be tweaks for the other species, for example, outside of periwinkles. Yeah.
When, in plain speak, if I can call it that, spawning times can be different in different regions. Yeah. And science would support that and show that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you.
Enough. Members, any other questions? No? Yeah, Gareth, yes.
I was just curious in terms of, as the chair has said and others have said, in terms of there does seem to be an element of, not doubt, but there just seems to be, in my mind, a lack of information. What measures are you using to calculate, periwinkle numbers generally around the coast of Northern Ireland? And how are you monitoring the numbers of them to know that there's pressure on the periwinkle, or is it just future and, to eliminate potential pressures on it? I
think that might be a question for AFB rather than myself in terms of the data collection coming in. But in terms of my background is in marine environmental management, so things like climate change, cumulative impacts you've seen in other areas where those pressures can mount if the measures are not put in place.
Enough, Gareth? As happy as you can be on a Monday morning. Robert, thank you very much. Yes, we've got a wee one. Yes, sorry.
Just in terms of the differences in the ban, obviously, what's the ecological difference between Strangford and Carlingford Loch?
That's a very good question. We don't know. I don't think we're aware of the extent of hand gatherers that are in Carlingford or around the rest of Northern Ireland. For example, the North Coast. I don't have the information in front of me in terms of what those numbers are in terms of periwinkle abundance or collections, but I'm aware that there's quite a large special protection area down in Carlingford Loch where periwinkles on the kind of intertidal rocky surface would be. There's also potential to see them on the aquaculture trestles as well, feeding there too.
Yeah, there is no ban in the south, that's
No.
the thing. So, and surely you would think that, like, is that something that you plan to do, is to get those numbers to try and match up?
I think this is, if there was a closed season, that would allow to see what those population sizes could be, but that could be a question for AFBI as well in terms of the data collection for that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Yeah, he should have come in with, it would have been better, but
Yeah.
happy enough.
Could you just frame it?
Yeah. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Just very quickly, Chair, thank you very much, and thank you all for your presentation. I'm just struck by your opening remarks and the paper that you've submitted, that essentially you're suggesting that there may be no compromise on this.
There are a number of other proposals in the 2022, such as a minimum landing size, a registration system, a personal bag consumption limit, a code of practice for gathering and a nighttime curfew, and that's for the department to work out the logistics of those. This is, we've been in support of the closed season amongst those other ones since 2022. There may be other measures that need to be brought in, but it's in terms of managing the sector. And with the information that is for Strangford, the information is there, but the problem is that we don't know the added pressure that will cause wider, so the displacement concerns are there from us.
Even as an interim basis, would you be content for them to revisit when the closed period may take place? Because obviously the previous witness had talked about May to August perhaps being a better option for the industry.
It might be better for the industry, but from a biological reproductive cycle, there is a concern that you're allowing gathering to take place when species are reproducing. So there is a potential that you are removing the next generation of periwinkles, which then has a knock-on effect further down the line. That would be my concern for it being a later season.
Thank you.
Just before I have one final question. I find that a very interesting point. So the spawning window is the same all around Northern Ireland, because I think we've been indicated that the spawning would be different in Lyme Regis. That's why it's there. So, like for instance, if this was on the north coast, would it still be spawning season? Still be January to end of March, start of April? And if we move further south, Carlingford or whatever, is it absolutely every periwinkle is in?
I think that might, apologies to throw it to AFBI again, I feel that might be a question for AFBI on the science.
That's useful in itself, to be honest. I'm going to be honest. Robert, I want to thank you for, you're always a great witness. You're always very honest, and I really appreciate that. We're kind of done, but you can sit in and listen. I'm going to ask if we can, through the technology, Brian Chambers is on here from INIFPO. So Brian was trying to get on when Paul was here, but if we can bring Brian on for a couple of seconds before we bring the department in. Brian, are you with us, Brian? See how the technology. You can go out that way, Robert, and come round and listen in if you like. How long does this take?
Can you hear me, Chair?
There he is.
I can hear you now. I can't see you, but yeah, we can hear you, Brian. You've got the committee's attention? So there you are now. Good
There
man.
you go. No, apologies about definitely getting on. Due to the short notice, I wasn't able to be there in person, or I would have been. So, I didn't get most of Paul's evidence there, but just to reiterate, I'm sure what a lot of Paul said. Coming from where I'm coming from, one of the POs, we represent more vessels than that, obviously, but it's been through to my attention recently that a lot of fishermen supplement their income by gathering periwinkles, especially in periods of bad weather, and that's how it's been through to my attention. With all the FMPs, I wasn't actually on the FMP for the periwinkles, because I say we represent vessels in that more. But with this short notice of a potential ban coming in, I've had a few of my guys in raising the issue with me and just how much it will affect them. So, as we all know, and as I say all the time, there's no one more invested in conservation than fishermen, and we've seen this through lobsters, as Paul alluded, through scallops, and in many cases, the fishermen actually lead from the front, whether it should be increasing the size of crabs, bringing in curfew. I think that just gives some wee indication of how invested fishermen are in protecting their industry. I'm not au fait with the ins and outs of the periwinkle markets, but from my own point of view, being involved with Sea Source here, the fishing industry, should it be pelagic, should it be scallop, should it be crabs, all markets, you make a commitment to fulfill them, especially when you're going to Europe. And that's one of the big concerns, that when these markets are lost, you don't just pick them up after the ban or after the close season, because once the guys that are buying these periwinkles, they will need to source them somewhere. And there's a wee bit of loyalty that once you start beginning to source a species from somewhere, you continue that relationship, and it's all about relationships. So once that relationship is broken, it can be quite difficult to pick it up. So just wanted to highlight it there too. One wee comment, I'm not sure what one of your committee there happened to say, that does more processors equate to more gatherers? That's definitely not the case. As Paul said, competition is good, and it increases the price, and it increases the variability of where you can go, but it doesn't necessarily equate to an increase in gatherers. Spawning, I think someone there mentioned spawning too. I wouldn't dream of being an expert in the biology of periwinkles, but just from my own experience, spawning, it does vary around the coast at different times of year. One example, just at the moment there, some of the boats are catching shrimps here at the minute. Shrimps on the west coast of Ireland, the spawning cycle is late autumn, whereas right on this Northern Ireland side, it's becoming more now April and May. So it just shows you there is a variability in spawning. So I think if the evidence isn't there, maybe AFB needs to do a wee bit more work to look into that there. And I find it difficult that this decision's been made at the moment whenever periwinkles is engaged in an FMP, and there's a lot of work going into that there. So I just don't see the logic in making this knee-jerk reaction in the midst of an FMP. But say, happy to take a few questions, but really, I only really represent a few fishermen that subsidise their income with periwinkles during periods of bad weather, as we're having at the moment.
I appreciate that, Bran. Just another thought occurred to me. I raised the question with the last witness there in regard to the window between January and the end of April, if they all spawned at the same time, which evidently I don't think they will. And the other thing is, if sea temperatures are indeed rising, which I don't think anybody argues with, that's going to change again. It'll continue to change. So when you have these fixed periods, it's going to mean nothing eventually. So I think the regulation could possibly be picked up in a more tangible, manageable way. It makes more sense, possibly, but obviously with the department and I think with AFB official in with us shortly. I don't have any questions for you, Brian. Do any members have any questions for Brian there? Gareth has one. Yes, go ahead, Gareth.
Yeah, it's just from your own perspective, Brian. Do you get any sense from those that you would be in contact with who do gather that there's any sort of a crisis in periwinkles, tangible or noticeable, in your estimation?
No, I'm not getting that feeling at all. So I'm not, say, Mother Nature's a habit of, with conditions on the coast here, and the tides and that, Mother Nature's sort of a habit of looking after herself, or looking after herself. So I'm not getting that feeling from my guys that have started coming in through the door recently, just when they heard about this potential ban.
Thank you, Gareth. Any other questions, members? Brian, you're more than welcome to listen in. And you might be
Okay,
interested-
thanks very much.
I think you might be interested in next week. Not a problem. And thank you for joining us so early on a Monday morning. Thank you. Okay, members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, members, we're going to move to agenda item 5. It is coming up on 20 to 11, members, so if we can get as much value out of this as possible. The oral briefing is from the Department on SR 2026/1, the Shellfish Gathering Conservation Regulations. So I'm now going to welcome the following officials to the meeting, and then they will be invited to brief the committee when they're making their way in from the witness box. So give them a wee second. Thank you. Your names are, there's Carrie is at that corner there, and then Fiona is here, and then Gareth and Patrick's on that end. Okay, so we have Gareth Dillon, the Deputy Director of Marine and Fisheries Division. We have Fiona Taylor, Head of Sea Fisheries Policy Branch. We have Patrick Smith, the Policy Officer, Sea Fisheries Policy Branch. And we have Dr. Carrie McKinn, Fisheries and Aquatic Ecosystems at AFBI. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm sure you're all excited to start your week off coming into committee. It's been a really good session so far, and you've had the benefit of listening to the other witnesses. It's always nicer to go last. We should have brought you guys in first. We'll do that the next time. Okay, so I'm just going to open the floor to you guys, and if you want to give us whatever sort of a update, you can comment on what you've heard, and then we'll take some questions from the committee if that's okay.
Some opening remarks, if that's okay.
Yes, please. Thank you, Gareth.
Hopefully, happy to take questions after that. So, obviously, commercial shellfish gathering can provide valuable jobs and income to coastal communities. However, if fishing practices are not managed sustainably, there is an obvious risk of collapse of the fishery, which would lead to job losses, loss of income for fish processors, and of course an impact on the coastal communities themselves. In June 2022, the Department launched a 12-week consultation seeking views on the development of management measures for unregulated intertidal hand gathering of shellfish in Northern Ireland. Consultation documentation emphasised that the Department held limited information on the commercial scale of this fishery because of it being unregulated. The consultation documentation also stated that having a more accurate idea of the economic value of gathering practices would help the Department assess the economic impact of different types of regulation and build that into the decision-making process, helping to minimise any negative impact incurred through introducing new regulations. It also requested any evidence available on the economic value of gathering to be provided by respondents to help inform the formulation of potential management options. The consultation itself was distributed electronically to stakeholders and made available through the DARA website, and DARA staff also engaged with harvesters and the public whenever possible in the field to raise awareness of the consultation amongst those affected by its proposals. The AFBI Strangford Loch study, a regulatory impact assessment, a rural needs impact assessment were also published alongside a habitat regulations assessment. The research undertaken by AFBI on periwinkles and Strangford Loch showed the spawning peak was between February and March, and recommended that close season from January to April would be the most effective time to protect future stock. There were 37 responses received to the consultation. The majority of respondents indicated that they had interest in marine conservation, recreation and the fishing industry. And the consultation asked several important questions pertinent to current regulations, and I'll take these in turn. The first question was whether or not respondents supported the proposal for a closed season from January to April. 86% of those who responded to the consultation said yes, 11% no, and 3% didn't answer. One respondent that didn't support the proposed closed season questioned the need for it when there had never been one before. The other respondents didn't provide any additional context or information to clarify their answers. Second question was whether any of the proposed measures would have an impact on you as a respondent or a particular sector of society. And importantly, they were asked to provide evidence to quantify and clarify their response. 24% of respondents said yes, it would have an economic impact, 65% no, and 11% didn't answer. Two respondents who objected to the closed season indicated there would be an economic impact also, but didn't quantify or state what that was or clarify it in any way. The remaining respondents who stated there would be an economic impact supported a closed season. Some highlight potential for lost revenue, tax revenue. Many shellfish gatherers were indicated to be members of foreign national communities and that they may be impacted by the proposals. And some, however, pointed out that the better regulation of the fishery could lead to legitimate jobs, a more sustainable fishery, and safeguard their income for the future, with one stating that it would be worth the cost to them, personally. The third question would be whether or not respondents felt that any particular section of society would be negatively impacted by the management of shellfish gathering, and again, to provide detail, 27% said yes, 54% no, and 19% didn't answer. Again, two of the respondents who had objected to a closed season said yes, but didn't provide any further detail. Members of the foreign national community were again highlighted by other respondents who are employed to gather or perhaps gather for personal consumption. And a respondent suggested that gatherers and processors may be negatively impacted in the short term, but they supported the proposition of a closure. So during our appearance before the committee on the 11th of December, we advised that it was our understanding that the export market was the greatest source for the periwinkles, and we believed it to be in the region of approximately 400 tonnes per year. And I've heard what Mr. Lehman said, 150 tonnes. Unfortunately, because it's unregulated, it's very difficult to be certain. I think that 400 tonne figure came from one of the local councils who provided that information based on a number of processors in the council area. When asked if a closed season was likely to have a negative impact upon this industry, we advised the committee if it was our belief that the greatest export market for periwinkles was France, and that was over the winter period. We advised that although that a closure would have some impact on the industry, we didn't believe it would negatively impact on that aspect of the market, i.e. the closure of the festive period, because the closure would come afterwards. An intertidal hand gathering of shellfish fisheries management plan working group was established in 2024 in order to consider further findings from the consultation and assist in steering the policies and proposed measures relating to sustainable gathering of periwinkles within the framework of the fisheries management plan itself. A number of processors were invited to be members, and at the same time some processors were asked for their views about things like a closed season and minimum size. There was further engagement. Obviously the fisheries management plan working group met, I believe, quarterly, and there was further then engagement with processors in September 2025 when 7 known processors were written to, highlighting the significant support from the 2022 consultation to regulating for a closed season from January to April to coincide with what the scientific advice stated was the peak spawning season. The department also contacted 21 fish culture operators around that similar time period in October 2025. So just in conclusion, the available scientific evidence from API identifies January to April as the peak spawning period for periwinkles. This is an unregulated industry, so therefore the information which is available to the department is somewhat regulated in terms of the numbers of pickers, the amounts that are gathered and sold. It's believed that a closed season will help to support its long-term sustainability and thereby supporting the industry itself, as well as protecting sensitive habitats and species dependent upon the periwinkle, either as a food source or its locations for their own habitats. Based upon the scientific evidence available to ourselves, the consultation responses and ongoing stakeholder engagement, we believe that the justification for these regulations remains, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. This might seem like an odd question, Gareth, but I'm always intrigued by this when departmental officials come before us from every department. So this has nothing to do with DAERA. In terms of the legacy understanding of this, Gareth, were you guys part of this in 2022 when the consultation went out? Was any? Were you on it, Patrick?
No.
Were you on it, Gareth? Were you on it, Fiona? Claire, were you on it?
So I've been working on periwinkle since 2011.
Brilliant. So the starting point for me is that out of 4 people given evidence today, 1 was part of the project at the start. And that's not to diminish anything. It's just for me to get an understanding of this is how things work in public service. I get it, but it's something I struggle with a little bit. So in terms of and the reason is because my first questions are about the consultation in 2022. And I'll set the context, and members will know exactly where I'm going with this. I was at a planning consultation 2 weeks ago, and there were 250 responses to a planning consultation. 220 of them were from outside the geographical area of note. So when you looked at the people that were actually speaking about the consultation, it was heavily weighted by people who actually didn't live in the area, would have no impact on them, but they have an interest in it from a different perspective. In terms of that consultation, those people that responded, is there a weighting, and do you know who responded? Was it totally anonymous? Are you confident that it was a fair reflection, based on the fact that the department have admitted that they have no understanding in 2022 of the economic viability of that part of the industry?
When it comes to a consultation itself, a number of background questions are generally asked, including the person to identify themselves. I think in this instance they were asked whether or not they gathered periwinkles themselves and sold them, whether they knew other people gathered them, or what their interest is. So I think I said that of the 37 respondents, there's a number of NGOs, people with interest either on the recreational side or the industry side, and people from a marine conservation background would have had an interest and would have responded to the consultation.
And at that time, I know you said that there was some stakeholder information shared in October 2025. At the time of the consultation, what did stakeholder involvement in consultation look like?
Because of it being an unregulated industry, obviously all consultations are promoted in a certain way. There's a certain cohort of stakeholders to whom it's promoted to, and there'd be key.
But was there stakeholder events? Sorry, I don't mean through the consultation. I mean, were there? So you've got the consultation, which will go up online, and I can apply to. What I'm asking is, were there other events like were there stakeholder events? You know, where people were brought into a room, and rather than just through the consultation period. Given the fact that DAERA is openly admitting that they didn't have a lot of information in regard to that, did DAERA actually seek a lot of more information at that time? And what more information did they gather between 2022 and 2025? 2026, actually, we're in now, 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think obviously it was this consultation was undertaken by the Marine Policy, and the reason why it's landed on us because we're responsible for fisheries legislation. But I understand there was some pre-engagement prior to consultation, and the consultation went live. Consultation then response was drawn up, and then it was cleared with the new minister when he came into office in 2024. Yeah, so that's sort of a bit of the context in terms of the timing of the consultation. But so that report was sitting pending clearance of a. And
the minister, to be fair, has had challenges because there's a lot of work has been sitting on desk. But I'm still not convinced that a lot of work was done between 2022 and 2026 to get the stakeholder, apart from the consultation, because you jumped very quickly to October 2025.
I think that obviously we had the interim period, but the purpose of a consultation itself is to help try and fill in some of the blanks in some of our understanding, and stakeholders and respondents were asked, particularly to try and provide further information or to quantify some of the response. So that is what we're trying to achieve through the consultation. Once the institutions were restored in 2024, I believe February, around that time, work would have been undertaken to finalise the synopsis report and have that published, and the FMP working group would have been established, and certainly some processes were invited to participate in that.
There you go. Somewhere we've had a few today. Probably didn't intimate that they would have been included, but
What happened, you see, was that 2022, the Joint Fisheries Statement was published, and that committed all the UK policy authorities to deliver over 40-something FMPs in a certain time frame. There was a consultation then, because the initial deadlines for publication for many of those were unrealistic, and you recall that we briefed the committee in November 2024. There was a consultation, UK-wide one, which essentially looked at the annex, which listed them all, and a lot of the deadlines for publication were shifted. At that opportunity, there was an opportunity, because we had the periwinkle consultation, to include that in one of the FMPs, but there was a response to the consultation from, I think it was one of the previous witnesses, and that gave rise to, listen, periwinkles doesn't sit easily with an inshore FMP for the catching sector, and there was a new FMP created for the intertidal hand gathering of FMP, which included all those other species. But we've already had the science for the periwinkles, the scientific report, so we were already considering some legislation in 2024 about a minimum size and a closed period, because those recommendations were coming through strongly in the AFBI report and the consultation. And I think at that meeting in 2024, one of the members asked, listen, do we need to wait until after 2027 before we implement any of the measures that might be therein, which would obviously then be 2028 before you would bring anything in? And we had said we had existing powers in the Fisheries Act of 66 to bring forward legislation for the conservation and preservation of any fishery, and that was explained to committee back then. Okay, so that points to the question that I asked Robert, which is why this can't go. What is the measured impact by DAERA or AFBI then, if this was just to be rolled up in the FMP for 2027? What's the anticipated impact on periwinkles if this wasn't made and then it was picked up? And because I think everybody understands this regulation is absolutely required, because this is an ecosystem, it's an economic system. It's all interconnected. What would be the impact?
The FMP itself, obviously, there's a statutory deadline of 2027 for that to be consulted on and published, but I think the legislation would have to follow that, so it wouldn't necessarily be the 2027, and in fact it's December 27, I think, for the FMP, so it wouldn't be the 2027, would be the time within which regulations would automatically follow, because I think there would have to be a period of time, policy development, consultation and things of that nature. In terms of the
impact on the legislation, what would be the impact on periwinkles?
It's just the frame in terms of the timescales involved. In terms of the impact on the periwinkles,
that might be one for Carrie to answer, if that's okay.
So obviously I'm a scientist and I base it on evidence, so it's unknown what the impact would be. There could be no impact in delaying it, or there could be a small impact, or there could be significant. We just don't know. This study was done in 2015, 2016, so it's already 10 years down the line. So I can't answer if there would be an impact or not in delaying the legislation.
Could I just add?
But there's certainly no red flag here. I'm not getting a red flag to say that there's a species wipeout, that there's anything imminent that's going to affect the ecosystem or the rare birds, and I've been down with Robert in regard to this. But what this committee is mindful of, it's a complicated committee, and when they put it together, obviously agriculture brought everything in. So we obviously are interested in sort of agriculture, but environmental stuff. But we're also interested in the economic viability for small towns, and small towns around the coast are impacted as hard and probably sometimes harder than our farming community too. So this is a really difficult one for us. That's why we're trying to tease this out. I'm sorry, you were going to come in there, Fiona.
Oh, appreciate that. Just to say that waiting for the FMP publication date shouldn't delay us bringing in regulations where we have evidence. And I think what was asked earlier was why periwinkles first, and that's firstly where we know that there's most fishing pressure in terms of these intertidal species, and we also have the Strangford Loch study, to base those measures on. So we have a stepping stone, we have a lot of groundwork already done on that, and the initial consultation was based on periwinkles alone, but because of other requests and the threat of other pressure to other species, that has now been extended out wider, but we need further scientific information before we start to regulate on those other species.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Declan, are you okay? Or I know Aoife has a question there. Aoife?
Yeah, so look, it has already been discussed earlier, just given that there's no current equivalent ban in the south, is there a risk that hand gathering activity will simply be displaced to shared neighbouring waters such as Carlingford Loch rather than reducing it overall?
It would be hard to predict what the trends and the patterns would be, but that's certainly a possibility. If there's a ban in one area, that may shift it to another area, and where it may then tip that area into unsustainability. But again, that would be speculative on our part to say that.
So, given your answer, my follow-up question was going to be what engagement has the department had with their counterparts in the south, but I'm presuming that has not happened.
No.
And is there any future plans to ensure, given that it is shared waterways, that there would be engagement had with the southern counterparts? Yeah, that's something that we can do, and we will be sharing our plans to regulate with our colleagues in the Republic of Ireland. So yes, it's definitely something that we would like to engage with them on, and it would be, we wouldn't want to be displacing gatherers into other areas, and we'd be happy to work with colleagues in the Republic of Ireland if they wanted to bring in similar measures.
We are trying to engage with them, Fiona. There's been a long-standing sort of invite that's still pending, trying to get a date in our diaries with the head of fisheries or sea fisheries down there. So, and I know that some of our enforcement colleagues do meet with the SFPA in the south, but certainly from a policy angle, we're certainly trying to get something in the diaries to meet them.
So we have a number of policy issues that we do wish to discuss, because we have such shared interests. So we really do want to discuss them with them. That's interesting, and it's positive that you've already made that engagement, but you're still waiting to hear back to get that. Okay. Waiting for availability at the moment. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Michelle?
Thank you, and again, thank you for your presentation. And I suppose I'm going over ground that's perhaps being covered, but one of the major criticisms that have come across our desks in the last sort of 10 days is the lack of engagement with industry. And I appreciate that you've detailed the fact that you've had the working group for the FMPs and you've had sort of conversations in that forum. How and why are we in a situation today where they feel that they didn't know until last weekend that this was actually going to happen? How do we end up in this place?
I mean, we do recognise committee's concerns about the communication of the implementation of the regulations and engagement with stakeholders. This is an unregulated industry, so we don't necessarily have, we certainly absolutely don't have a list of the hand gatherers. And I think Mr. Lehman mentioned there might have been between 80 and 100 along the Northern Irish coast. But we wouldn't know who any of these are. The consultation synopsis report, I believe it may have been, referred to the promotion of the consultation to whenever they're in the field and they would come across numbers of people hand gathering, but there is obviously a limitation as to how far we can go. The consultation itself is published through the normal channels. Whenever we got numbers of processors, we have written to those, albeit after, in terms of invitations to the FMP working group, where the periwinkles proposals would have formed part of it, not only just in terms of the present regulations, but the wider considerations in terms of landing size or night curfew, etc., that are going to take place as part of the wider FMP discussions. So there has been engagement then in 2024. In 2025, processors were invited to be part of the FMP, and there's an industry, there's fairly regular catch up or engagement with industry representatives, so they would have been communicated through that. We appreciate that there absolutely are lessons to be learned in this, and that improving our approach to communication is something that we're keen to do. We're always keen to engage with stakeholders where we can, but to a certain degree we were limited by the industry itself being, or the fishery being unregulated.
and I appreciate that, but I suppose the number of processors are very limited. You're talking 2 or 3 processors who will obviously have the contact details for their gatherers, because obviously that's where they're getting their stocks from. So I suppose that aspect of the work probably shouldn't have been too onerous. So I suppose there are certainly lessons to be had moving forward. Like, I'm guessing that we wouldn't be having these discussions today, and perhaps having a discussion around reconsidering our position as a committee with regards to moving this forward had there not been better communication. And I suppose the conversations that you did have around the working group, how definitive were these? Because obviously you've been working up these regulations for some time. Was it, were your conversations around that this is definitely coming in, or this is something that we may look at? I'm just not sure, still not really clear as to what those conversations were with processors and stakeholders.
No, we have this intertidal FMP working group, and I know that, obviously there's a commitment to delivering this by 2027, but whenever we convened that for the first couple of meetings, we had some stuff coming out of the AFB study, which had the recommendations and the support through the consultation. We did have a draft SR considered at those working groups. One was initially for having a closed season for periwinkles, a minimum size. Then we thought we might actually have a one size fits all for a closed season for all 5 species. But AFB sit in that, and other members, other stakeholders sit in, and that wasn't going to work because all the other species have different spawning periods. So then we revisited that back and wrote back, and that's when we came up with a draft statutory rule, which then was obviously put to the Minister and the committee prior to Christmas, before this new arrangement for the SL1 scrutiny, and that wasn't deliberate, by the way.
I think just unfortunately for me, the benefits of what's being proposed have kind of been lost around this now, given I suppose the lack of communication with industry and the preparation that would have afforded them time to get have conversations with those who are obviously have orders with them. So, and around that sort of economic piece, that now concerns me, and in some ways has, I suppose, neutralised, I suppose, at this point in time where I would be with regards to the benefits of it. I suppose it would be looking about if there are opportunities about looking at a further compromise, or maybe having to revisit it at a later date, if there is a willingness to have a conversation then with the processors.
Can I just add on the engagement that we have the Inshore Fisheries Partnership Group as well, where we provide regular updates as to how the Fisheries Management Plan Working Group was progressing. We also meet with our producer organisations on a monthly basis, and in October we updated both the NIFPO and NIFPO on our plans to bring forward that regulation. So we did update them in October on that. And to also add that we have highlighted throughout the working group minutes of the meetings that engagement with processors has been particularly difficult to get, and we would really appreciate further engagement with them, and we would really welcome closer engagement, and completely happy to engage closer with them on the future development of the fisheries management plan, because their viewpoints are really valuable in the development of these types of regulation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And John?
Yeah, just to clarify, you've explained that the FMP working group invites were issued in relation to that to sectoral representatives. I haven't heard yet that they accepted them. Can you confirm that they accepted those invites and participated in that?
I think originally there was possibly 4 invitations issued. I know from looking through the minutes that at least one processor did participate, at least originally. That has been supplemented by some of the correspondence that I mentioned, so April 24, September 25, October 25, and then through the meetings that Fiona has mentioned as well. So engagement with the processes has been challenging, quite why that is, I don't know. We would obviously welcome more. We're very open to more engagement, but it brings with it its difficulties.
Okay, and the meetings of the Insurers Partnership Group that Fiona mentioned there, representative bodies were in attendance at those meetings, and in October there was a discussion around the forthcoming proposal for this SR and the close season.
It's October. No, we had an Inshore Fisheries Partnership Group in November. But certainly the one prior to that, we had flagged up that we were minded to bring forward legislation for a closed season for periwinkles.
Would have been March.
Okay.
I think it was
And
June,
the
June, I think it was June.
the representative bodies, one of whom was a witness this morning, were at that meeting.
They weren't at it. There was an apology from them. You know, it was recorded in the minutes.
They were at the meeting in October, though. They were at the meeting in October, the industry meeting.
Okay. Okay. And this is genuinely not a criticism of you guys, because Patrick, you've already pointed out that the system for issuing SL1s and further SRs has now changed. And under the new regime, this probably could have been avoided somewhat, because I think had we had the SL1, we would have sought witnesses, and then we wouldn't be in the stage where the committee is now going to move this forward, because there's no doubt, in my opinion, I'm speaking for the committee, that regulation would be good and regulation would be required, but I'm going to have to put a question to the committee shortly. So you're welcome to stay. Has anybody got any further points just for the Department of Fisheries? Okay, Anya.
For clarity, and as they were briefing us, I had got the AFB report up just in relation to that data set, Gary, that was taken from 2015, 2016. What would your scientific opinion be in terms of using a data set that's 10 years old to then, present an SR, or I suppose any type of legislation based on what some would perceive as outdated data?
Yeah, well, if you look back at data on periwinkles and when they're spawning across the rest of the UK, and most of those studies were done in the 70s, so 73 and 75 there was major studies done, and they found that all the other spawning times were between February with the latest in June, so ours falls in that range. So there hasn't been a change since the 70s to what we're finding nowadays. So obviously I can't say for certain that there has been no change since we did that, but I would be quite content to go with the data that we collected in 2015-16 as it is accurate.
Okay, members, is there anything else just before I do then move us on to the next piece of the meeting? Yeah.
Okay.
You're like Daniel, just another wee. Or William,
Yeah.
William used to do that, just another wee one.
A wee one. Just in terms of an economic impact assessment, was there an assessment carried out by the department? And if so, could we? Well, I don't know if it's.
We're going to be putting the question shortly, so but okay, some answer on that would be fine.
Yeah, there was a regulatory impact assessment that accompanied the 2022 consultation. Gareth alluded to that in his initial remarks. So there was three options, which were simply to do nothing and leave the thing totally unregulated. Second option was to totally close everything down, and then the third option, which was the one that was then put out to consultation, was to bring in some form of management measures. And there was an economic impact and assessment as part of that regulatory impact assessment, so that was published with the consultation.
And I would assume I've got the SR up here with the regulatory impact detailed. No, there is no mention of specific economic impacts linked to each of those three options. And again, I don't know if the department has anything pinned down on that.
I think that comes back to the difficulty that, even to this day, it hasn't been quantified what the size of this industry is, and we have various indications of when the peak value would be. We don't know what's sold over the 12-month period and the trends on that. So without that information, it would be very difficult to quantify with any real certainty.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you're more than welcome to hang fire to hear the last words of the committee. If there's nothing else, members, yeah? Content? Okay. Members, it's now 11:10. Plenary will be starting in 50 minutes. And we won't get in trouble with your party chief whips. I've just asked, and I'll just ask you, members, do you have any further comments? We can have a discussion in open session. If any member feels the need to go into a closed session for discussion, I'm happy enough. Does any member? Are you just happy enough? Okay, no other comments. Okay, members. Okay, agenda item 6 is the decision whether or not to rescind the previous committee decision on the SR 2026/1, the Shellfish Gathering Conservation Regulations in Northern Ireland 2026. So members, based on what we have heard and discussed on this SR, I will now put the question. Do members wish to rescind the previous decision of the committee to support the SR? The answer is a yes or a no. So I take an answer for yes with a hand, and we're happy to record the vote if so wish. Yeah. So do we want to rescind the SR, the committee decision? A hand, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Do you want yours recorded as a no, John?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the answer is yes, Clerk. I'm going to put the question then, that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has reconsidered the statutory rule, the SR 2026/1, the Shellfish Gathering and Conservation Regulations, Northern Ireland 2026, and recommends that it be annulled by the Assembly as per debate. Are members content? Okay, members. Sorry?
Do you want to record a
vote
on the prayer of annulment?
I think the vote, I take it, is the same 6-1. Okay, on the prayer of annulment? Yeah. Okay, members, thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 7. Any other business? Okay. Just a wee one. Okay, members, the date and time and place of the next meeting will be Thursday the 5th of February at 10 a.m. in room 21. Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses for attending today. Thank you.
Senate Chamber. Sound